For 3 years, he stayed quiet while his boss called him boy and threw trash at his feet. What that boss didn't know: the janitor he was humiliating was a former Golden Gloves champion and Army combat instructor who could end a fight in seconds. When the truth finally came out, it didn't just shock everyone in that gym. It sparked a legal battle that went viral worldwide and changed hundreds of lives forever. It's 11:30 at night in Cleveland, Ohio, and while most people are home with their families, David Carter is on his hands and knees, scrubbing sweat and dirt off a martial arts mat that costs more than his monthly rent. He's 42 years old. His back aches. His knees hurt. And as he wrings out the mop for the third time tonight, he catches his reflection in the polished hardwood floor of Steel Edge Academy, one of the most prestigious martial arts gyms in the city. The man staring back at him looks tired, worn down, invisible. But here's what nobody at Steel Edge knows. That tired janitor mopping their floors? He used to be a Golden Gloves boxing champion. He spent 8 years as an Army combatives instructor, teaching soldiers how to survive hand-to-hand combat. He's a martial arts master with over 20 years of elite training in multiple disciplines. David Carter isn't just a janitor. He's a warrior who traded his gloves for a mop bucket. And tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, he's choosing to stay silent while the world treats him like he's nobody. Let me tell you why. David has a daughter. Her name is Leah, and she's 16 years old, smart, beautiful, and full of dreams about college and changing the world. She's the kind of kid who still hugs her dad goodbye every morning, even though her friends think it's uncool. But Leah's mom, David's wife, is fighting breast cancer. Stage 3. The kind that doesn't just take your strength, it takes your savings, your hope, and sometimes your faith. Every month, medical bills flood their mailbox, like a cruel reminder that even love costs money in America. David needed work. Fast work. Any work. So, when Steel Edge Academy posted a night janitor position for $12 an hour, he took it without hesitation. No questions asked, no pride involved. Just a father doing whatever it takes to keep his family afloat. He thought it would be simple: clean the mats, empty the trash, go home to his daughter. Keep your head down. Collect the check. Survive. But he didn't count on Blake Henderson. Blake Henderson is 35 years old, and he thinks he's a celebrity. He owns a 30% stake in Steel Edge Academy, drives a BMW he can barely afford, and walks around the gym like he's the next big thing in mixed martial arts. But here's the truth Blake doesn't want anyone to know. He used to dream of being a professional fighter. He trained for years, talked a big game, and then stepped into the ring against real competition. And he lost, over and over again. So Blake did what a lot of failed fighters do. He became a coach. And because Steel Edge caters to wealthy clients who don't know the difference between good technique and flashy moves, Blake gets to play the role of the master. He teaches businessmen's kids how to throw punches, charges $200 an hour, and acts like he's doing them a favor. But his ego? Oh, his ego is fragile. The kind of fragile that needs constant feeding. The kind that can't stand being challenged, corrected, or even questioned. And when Blake looks at David, a quiet, humble black man pushing a mop, he sees someone perfect to feed that ego. It started small. "Hey, boy, you missed a spot." David would look up from mopping, and Blake would be standing there with his arms crossed, smirking like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. His students would laugh nervously, not sure if they should join in or look away. David would just nod, walk back, and clean the spot again. Then it got worse. Blake started dropping empty water bottles on the floor, right in front of David, on purpose, just so he'd have to bend down and pick them up. He'd make comments during his classes, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people are just born to clean up after others, you know? At least he's good at something. Every insult was a little cut. Every laugh from his students was salt in the wound. But David kept his head down, his mouth shut, and his hands moving. Because every shift he worked, every dollar he earned was another day his daughter didn't have to worry, another treatment his wife could afford, another month they could hold onto their home. Pride is expensive, and right now, David couldn't afford it. But not everyone at Steel Edge was blind. Rachel Lopez, the assistant manager, had been watching Blake for months. She's the kind of person who notices things, the way Blake's tone changes when he talks to minority staff, the way his jokes always have an edge, the way people quit without giving a reason. Rachel started keeping records, emails, incident reports, dates and times of complaints. She locked them away in a cabinet in her office, hoping she'd never need them, but knowing she probably would. 3 other staff members, all people of color, had already quit because of Blake. Steel Edge management didn't ask why. They just hired replacements and moved on. And then there was Coach Ramirez, an old-school boxing instructor who'd been in the fight game for 40 years. He had the kind of eyes that could spot a real fighter from across a crowded room. And he'd been watching David, the way David moved when he swept near the heavy bags. His stance was too perfect, too balanced. When he reached up to dust the high shelves, his shoulders stayed level, his core tight. And just once, Coach Ramirez saw David shadowbox for half a second while he thought no one was looking. That wasn't the movement of a janitor. That was muscle memory, the kind you only get from years in the ring. Coach Ramirez didn't say anything. Not yet. But he kept watching. And he knew. Whoever David Carter used to be, he wasn't just a man who cleaned floors. One evening, after a particularly long shift, David came home to find Leah waiting for him at the kitchen table. She had her phone in her hand, and her eyes were red. "Dad," she said quietly, "why do you let him treat you like that?" David's heart sank. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" She turned her phone around. Someone had filmed Blake mocking David at the gym and posted it online. The caption read, "When your janitor thinks he's people faced with tears of joy." David sat down next to his daughter and took a long breath. He wanted to tell her that it didn't hurt, that words couldn't touch him, that he was stronger than Blake's cruelty. But Leah was 16 and she was smart. She'd see through the lie. So he told her the truth. "Because right now, keeping you safe matters more than my pride. Your mom needs her treatments. You need to finish school. We need this house. And if I lose this job..." He paused. "We lose everything." Leah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "That's not fair, Dad." "No," David said softly. "It's not. But life isn't fair, baby girl. And the people who survive aren't always the strongest or the smartest. They're the ones who know what's worth fighting for." He wrapped his arm around her, and for a moment they just sat there in the quiet kitchen, holding onto each other like it was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. But as Leah went upstairs to bed, David stayed at that table, staring at his calloused hands. The hands that used to win championships. The hands that used to command respect. And he thought about something his old boxing coach used to tell him. "Everyone has a breaking point, son. Everyone. The question isn't if you'll reach it. The question is what you'll do when you get there." David didn't know it yet, but that breaking point was coming. And when it did, the whole world would see who he really was. For 3 years, David Carter had been invisible. A ghost in a janitor's uniform, moving through Steel Edge Academy like he didn't exist. But here's the thing about being invisible for too long. Eventually, people forget you're even human. They forget you have a voice. They forget you might know something they don't. And that forgetting, that's when mistakes get made. Blake Henderson was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the gym was packed with Blake students, mostly wealthy teenagers whose parents paid premium rates for elite training. Blake was in the middle of demonstrating a defensive blocking technique, the kind of move that sounds good in theory but falls apart against a real opponent. His star student, Tyler Brooks, had just lost a regional tournament over the weekend, badly, and Blake was furious because Tyler had used the exact technique Blake taught him. and got destroyed because of it. But Blake wasn't going to admit his technique was flawed. That would mean admitting he wasn't the master he pretended to be. So instead, he blamed street fighters for spreading bad habits. He blamed the ref for bad calls. He blamed everything except his own teaching. David was sweeping near the wall, trying to stay invisible like always. But as Blake demonstrated the same flawed block again, showing his students the exact move that had gotten Tyler knocked out, David felt something crack inside him. He'd watched Blake teach wrong techniques for 3 years. He'd bitten his tongue 1,000 times. But watching these kids, these trusting kids, learn something that could get them seriously hurt, that was different. That's not how you block it, David muttered, almost to himself, barely above a whisper. But in that moment, the gym had gone quiet between drills, and everyone heard him. The room froze. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the janitor holding a broom in the corner. Blake's face went from confusion to shock to something dark and ugly. "What did you say?" Blake's voice was ice cold. David's heart sank. He'd just broken his own rule. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay employed. "Nothing, sir. My apologies." But Blake wasn't letting this go. His ego had been bruised by Tyler's loss, and now the janitor, the man he'd mocked and humiliated for years, had just questioned him in front of his students? Oh, no. This required a response. Blake walked slowly toward David, that cruel smile spreading across his face. No, please. Share with the class, Mr. Expert." He gestured toward the mat. "Since you clearly know better than me, why don't you show us how it's done?" The students shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. They could feel the tension, the trap being set. David tried to decline. "I'm just here to clean, Mr. Henderson." I spoke out of turn. "I insist." Blake's eyes were gleaming now. He was going to humiliate this janitor in front of everyone. Put him in his place once and for all. "Go ahead. Show us. Unless you were just talking out of your—" "Okay," David said quietly. "I'll show you." David set down his broom and stepped onto the mat. He was still wearing his janitor's uniform, the cheap polo shirt with the steel-edge logo, the worn-out work boots, the pants with bleach stains from years of cleaning. Blake threw him a pair of gloves, smirking. "Whenever you're ready, Professor." For just a moment, David stood there, and something changed in his posture. His shoulders settled. His breathing slowed. His eyes focused. Coach Ramirez, watching from the side, recognized it immediately. That was the stance of a fighter. A real one. David showed the technique, the correct defensive block, with such precision that it looked effortless. Every movement was clean, economical, perfect. Then, without being asked, he moved to the heavy bag. And that's when everything changed. The first punch hit the bag with a sound like a gunshot. Crack! The entire bag swung on its chain. The second punch was faster. The third was a combination so quick and so powerful that students actually gasped. David threw 6 punches in 3 seconds, and every single one of them would have ended a fight. The gym went dead silent. This wasn't a janitor who'd watched some YouTube videos. This was a master, the real thing. And everyone in that room suddenly understood. They'd been learning from a fraud while a champion swept the floors. David stopped, breathing calmly, and turned to Blake. "That's how you do it, sir. May I get back to work now?" Blake's face had gone from red to white. His hands were shaking, because in less than 30 seconds, the janitor had just exposed everything. The fake expertise, the inflated ego, the Emperor's new clothes had been ripped away in front of everyone, and Blake Henderson was standing there naked. You know what happens when you humiliate a small man with a big ego? He becomes dangerous. Over the next few days, Blake's treatment of David went from cruel to sadistic. He forced David to mop the mats while classes were in session, making him crawl around students' feet. He accidentally spilled entire bottles of sports drinks right where David had just cleaned. He told students loudly that some people should just stick to what they're good at, taking out trash, but that wasn't enough for Blake. Late one night, after David had gone home, Blake pulled up the security footage from that Tuesday afternoon. He found the clip of David on the heavy bag, those devastating punches, that perfect form, and he uploaded it to Instagram. The caption read, "When the help forgets his place. Face with tears of joy, hashtag, stay in your lane, hashtag, know your role." By morning, the video had 50,000 views. By noon, it had 500,000. The comments section became a cesspool of racism, mockery, and cruelty. Bro thinks he's tough, 'cause he can hit a bag skull. Imagine being 40 and working as a janitor, LMAO. This is what happens when you don't finish school. There were worse ones. Much worse. The kind of comments that reveal just how ugly people can be when they're hiding behind a screen. Leah saw the video during lunch at school. A classmate showed it to her, not knowing it was her father. She watched students she'd known for years laugh at the man who worked 2 jobs to keep her safe, who held her when she cried, who'd given up everything so she could have a future. She locked herself in a bathroom stall and cried until her chest hurt. That night, when David came home from his shift, he found his daughter sitting on the couch with her phone in her lap and tears streaming down her face. "Baby, what's wrong?" She couldn't even speak. She just turned the phone toward him. David watched the video. He read the comments. And for the first time in 3 years, Leah saw something she'd never seen before. Her father's hands curling into fists. But then he sat down next to her, took a deep breath, and unclenched those fists. He pulled Leah close and held her while she cried into his shoulder. "They don't define who we are," he whispered. "They don't know your mom's strength. They don't know your dreams. They don't know what we've survived together. And they sure as hell don't know me." "But it's not fair," Leah choked out. "You're the best man I know, and they're treating you like I'm nobody?" David finished gently. "Sweetheart, I stopped needing the world's permission to know my worth a long time ago. And you should too." But as he held his daughter that night, David felt something he hadn't felt in years, that old fire, that fighter's instinct, that voice saying enough, enough running, enough hiding, enough. The next morning, Coach Ramirez pulled David aside before his shift started. "Listen to me carefully," the old coach said in a low voice. "Blake's planning to fire you tomorrow. He's already talked to management. They're going to say it's budget cuts, but we both know the truth." David nodded slowly. He'd expected this. "But there's something else you should know," Coach Ramirez continued. "That video? It's everywhere. People in the martial arts community are asking questions. Real fighters recognize what they saw. Blake's reputation is hanging by a thread, and he knows it." David looked at the old coach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop hiding who you are. Maybe it's time to remind everyone that respect isn't given to the loudest person in the room. It's earned by the strongest." That afternoon, David walked into Blake's office. No broom, no mop, just a man looking another man in the eye. "I challenge you," David said calmly. "One match, in the ring. Fair fight. 3 rounds. Winner stays at steel edge. Loser leaves for good." Blake laughed. Actually laughed. "You're serious?" "Completely." Blake's smile widened. He thought he was being handed a gift, a chance to destroy this janitor legally, publicly, and permanently. To prove he was the alpha. To reclaim his throne. "You're on," Blake said. "Friday night. And when I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd stayed invisible." News of the fight spread through Cleveland's martial arts community like wildfire. By Friday evening, over 200 people had packed into Steel Edge Academy. Phones were everywhere, ready to capture every second. Blake entered the ring like a peacock, fancy shorts, expensive gloves, his personal walkout, music blaring through the speakers. He shadowboxed for the crowd, soaking up the attention. David entered wearing an old gray hoodie and worn-out gloves that had seen better days. No music, no show, Just a quiet man walking toward the center of the ring. The referee went over the rules. 3 3-minute rounds. Protect yourself at all times. Touch gloves. Blake slapped David's gloves away with a sneer. You're done, old man. The bell rang, and for the next 9 minutes, Blake Henderson learned a lesson that most bullies eventually learn. There's always someone stronger. Round 1 was all defense. David moved like water, smooth, effortless, impossible to hit. Blake threw combinations, hooks, uppercuts, everything he had, and David slipped them all. Every single one. The crowd started murmuring. This wasn't supposed to happen. Round 2, David started to counter. Nothing flashy, just clean, precise shots that landed exactly where he wanted them. A jab to set up distance. A straight right that snapped Blake's head back. A body shot that made Blake wince and drop his guard. Coach Ramirez, watching from the corner, smiled. There he is. There's the Real fighter. By round 3, the crowd had completely turned. They were cheering for the Janitor, chanting his name, because they were watching something rare and beautiful. Pure skill, destroying pure ego. Blake was exhausted, frustrated, humiliated, and in his rage, he did what desperate fighters always do. He charged forward with everything he had, technique abandoned, just trying to land one big shot to end it. David sidestepped like a matador avoiding a bull, and threw a left hook that connected so perfectly, so cleanly, that the sound echoed through the gym. Blake Henderson dropped to the canvas, unconscious before he hit the mat. The place exploded. Phones captured it from every angle. Within minutes, the footage was uploaded, shared, retweeted, and spread across the internet faster than the mockery video ever had. Hashtag Justice for David started trending nationwide. Professional fighters, veterans, coaches, and everyday people called him an inspiration. The underdog who finally fought back. The invisible man who became impossible to ignore. David helped Blake to his feet after he came to, showing more respect than Blake had ever shown him. Good fight, David said quietly. Blake didn't respond. He just stumbled out of the ring, defeated in every sense of the word. David thought it was over. He thought justice had been served. He thought he could finally go home to his daughter and tell her that standing up for yourself matters, that dignity wins, that truth always rises to the surface. But 3 days later, there was a knock on David's door. 2 police officers stood on his porch with an arrest warrant. David Carter, you're under arrest for felony assault. And just like that, David learned the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes, winning the fight is the easy part. David Carter sat in a cold interrogation room, still trying to understand how victory had turned into handcuffs. 24 hours ago, he'd been a hero, a trending hashtag, a man who'd finally stood up for himself and won. The internet had celebrated him. Strangers had called him an inspiration. Now, he was facing 5 years in prison. The detective across from him slid a folder across the table. Inside were medical photos of Blake Henderson, bruised face, arm in a sling, neck brace. There were pages of legal documents, witness statements, and a lawsuit claiming David Carter was a trained fighter who deliberately concealed his violent background to assault an innocent man. Mr. Henderson is claiming you attacked him without consent, the detective said flatly. Says the whole thing was a setup, that you tricked him into the ring knowing you had professional training. David stared at the photos. It was a fair fight, witnessed by 200 people. He agreed to it. He signed a waiver. A waiver for a sanctioned bout between equals, the detective replied. But you're not equals, are you, Mr. Carter? You're a Golden Gloves champion, Army combatives instructor, 20 years of elite training. He leaned forward. You knew exactly what would happen when you stepped into that ring. And you did it anyway. That's when David understood. Blake wasn't just suing him. Blake was rewriting the entire story, turning himself into the victim and David into the villain. And it was working. By the next morning, Blake Henderson was on every major news channel. He sat in a TV studio wearing that arm sling, his face painted with the perfect amount of bruising, enough to look hurt, not enough to look weak. His lawyer sat beside him, and together they spun a story that would make your stomach turn. "I was terrified," Blake said, his voice trembling just right. This man had been watching me for years, studying me, waiting for the right moment to attack. When he challenged me, I thought it was just, a friendly sparring match. I had no idea he was a trained killer. A trained killer. Those words echoed across every news broadcast. He concealed his entire background. Blake's lawyer added smoothly, "My client is a small business owner and martial arts instructor trying to make an honest living. Mr. Carter is a combat veteran with decades of experience in hurting people. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a premeditated assault." The footage of the knockout played on loop, but now, with Blake's narrative framing it, the same punch that had looked like justice last week looked like brutality this week. Social media exploded, but this time, it wasn't on David's side. Hashtag Justice for Blake started trending. People who'd never met either man suddenly had strong opinions. Comment sections filled with anger, judgment, and assumptions. He could have killed that man. Typical thug behavior. Why was he even working there if he's so trained? Thinking face, lock him up before he hurts someone else. The same internet that had celebrated David now wanted him destroyed. David's public defender was a tired woman named Sandra Chun who handled 90 cases at a time and barely had 15 minutes to discuss his future. "They're offering a plea deal," she said, shuffling through papers. "Plead guilty to misdemeanor assault, 6 months in jail, probation. It's the best we're going to get." "I didn't do anything wrong," David said. "It was a fair fight." "Fair doesn't matter, Mr. Carter. What matters is optics. And right now, you're a trained fighter who put a civilian in the hospital. The jury is going to see those medical photos, and I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do." Sandra sighed the sigh of someone who'd had this conversation 100 times. "Then you're going to trial, against a legal team that costs more per hour than you make in a month. And if you lose, when you lose, you're looking at 5 years minimum." That night, David sat at his kitchen table with Leah. His wife was upstairs, too weak from chemo to come down. The medical bills were still piling up. And now, legal fees were crushing them from another angle. "What are we going to do, Dad?" Leah asked quietly. David looked at his daughter, this brilliant, beautiful 16-year-old who'd already been through more than most adults, and he felt something break inside him. "I don't know, baby girl," he admitted. "I honestly don't know." For the first time in his life, David Carter felt defeated. Not by punches, not by poverty, but by a system that believed the person with the better lawyer over the person telling the truth. But Leah Carter was her father's daughter, and she wasn't about to let him give up. The next day, she started making TikTok videos. Not polished ones, not scripted ones, just real, raw videos of their life. Her phone camera filming the stack of medical bills on the counter. Her dad's work boots by the door, worn down to nothing. The empty prescription bottles they couldn't afford to refill. She filmed herself talking directly to the camera. "Everyone's calling my dad a trained killer. You want to know what he really is? He's a man who works 2 jobs to pay for my mom's cancer treatments. He's a father who's never missed one of my school events, even when he's exhausted. He's the person who taught me that strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how much you can endure and still choose kindness." She showed footage of David at home, reading to his wife, helping Leah with homework, cooking dinner on his one day off. The gentle man behind the fighter. "Blake Henderson mocked my dad for 3 years, Leah said, her voice shaking but steady. "Called him boy, threw things at him, humiliated him in front of everyone. And my dad stayed quiet because he needed that job to keep our family alive. But when he finally stood up for himself, when he finally said, "Enough, now he's the villain," she looked directly into the camera, tears in her eyes. If that's how the world works, then the world is broken. The videos went viral, not because they were flashy or dramatic, but because they were true. People saw Leah's genuine pain and recognized something the news broadcasts had missed: humanity. Comments started shifting. "We got played. This man was protecting his family. Blake Henderson is a fraud, and we all fell for it. A 16-year-old girl shouldn't have to defend her father on TikTok for the world to see the truth." Within days, #JusticeForDavid was trending again, but this time it was bigger, louder, and it wasn't just about a knockout anymore. It was about dignity, survival, and a system that protects bullies while punishing the people who stand up to them. Professional fighters started speaking out. Veterans shared their own stories. Regular people who'd been overlooked and underestimated their whole lives saw themselves in David's story. The narrative was shifting back. Slowly, painfully, but it was shifting. And then Coach Ramirez played his card. For days before the trial was set to begin, Coach Ramirez walked into David's lawyer's office with a USB drive. "What's this?" Sandra Chin asked. "Insurance," the old coach replied. "I've been recording Blake Henderson for 8 months. Every conversation, every interaction, every time he thought no one was paying attention." Sandra plugged in the drive, and what she heard made her jaw drop. 17 minutes of audio. Blake's voice, crystal clear, saying things that would end his career, his reputation, and his lawsuit. That janitor thinks he's people. Someone needs to remind him what he is. "I swear if one more racial slur tries to tell me how to run my gym, I'm going to make him regret ever stepping on my mat. I'll destroy him legally, financially, whatever it takes." There was more. So much more. Threats. Slurs. Admissions of harassment. Blake bragging to other trainers about how he'd set up the fight so he could sue David afterward and take everything that slur has. It was damning, undeniable, and recorded perfectly. "Why didn't you come forward with this sooner?" Sandra asked, almost angry. Coach Ramirez looked tired. "Because I'm 70 years old, and I've seen what happens to people who stand up to men like Blake. They lose their jobs, their reputations, everything. I was afraid." He paused. "But I'm more afraid of living with myself if I stay silent and watch an innocent man go to prison." Sandra Chun made 3 phone calls. By that evening, the audio had been submitted as evidence. By the next morning, it had somehow leaked to the press. The internet didn't just shift this time. It exploded. The trial lasted 3 days. Blake's expensive lawyers tried everything, claiming the audio was fake, taken out of context, illegally recorded. But Coach Ramirez had done everything by the book. Ohio is a one-party consent state. He was legally allowed to record his own conversations. Rachel Lopez testified next, bringing years of documented harassment complaints. 3 former employees testified about Blake's racism and abuse. The evidence piled up like a mountain Blake couldn't climb. And then came the moment that sealed his fate. During cross-examination, Blake lost his temper. Completely. When Sandra Chun asked him about the racial slurs on the recording, Blake shouted across the courtroom. That slur deserved everything he got. "You don't disrespect me in front of my students. You don't embarrass me in my own gym." The courtroom went silent. The jury's faces shifted from neutral to disgusted. Even Blake's own lawyer dropped his head into his hands. You can spin a story. You can manipulate a narrative. But you can't hide who you really are when you're angry enough to forget you're being watched. The mask had finally completely fallen off. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, the 4-woman stood and read the verdict in a clear, steady voice. "We find the defendant, David Carter, not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted. Leah burst into tears, hugging her father, so hard he could barely breathe. David's wife, watching via video call from home because she was too weak to attend, sobbed with relief. But the judge wasn't finished. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Martinez said, her voice like steel, "I've been on this bench for 18 years, and I have rarely seen such a clear case of malicious prosecution and harassment. Not only is Mr. Carter cleared of all charges, but I am ordering you to pay him $75,000 in damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and defamation." Blake's face went white. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am forwarding this case to the Ohio Athletic Commission and recommending your instructor's license be permanently revoked. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down like thunder. Within 24 hours, the Ohio Athletic Commission stripped Blake Henderson of his trainer's license. Permanently. No appeals. Steel Edge Academy terminated his contract and removed his name from all promotional materials. His sponsors, the ones who'd paid him to represent their brands, dropped him overnight. Blake Henderson went from wannabe celebrity to cautionary tale in less than a week. Last anyone heard, he was teaching cardio kickboxing at a small fitness center in Montana. No social media presence. No students asking for autographs. Just a bitter man in his late 30s teaching bored suburban moms how to punch the air. Karma doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it's thorough. David used the settlement money combined with an overwhelming wave of crowdfunding donations from people across the country to open Phoenix Rising Martial Arts in East Cleveland. It wasn't fancy. No glossy floors or expensive equipment. Just a clean, safe space where anyone could train, regardless of their background or bank account. David taught self-defense to women who'd survived domestic violence. At-risk youth who needed discipline and purpose, veterans struggling with PTSD who found peace in the structure of training. He charged what people could afford. Sometimes that was $50. Sometimes it was $5. Sometimes it was nothing at all. Above the entrance, painted in bold letters, was the gym's motto: "A true warrior lifts others up, not breaks them down." Phoenix Rising became more than a gym. It became a movement. Over 300 martial arts centers across the country adopted David's code of conduct: zero tolerance for harassment, racism, or bullying. They called it the Carter Standard. Leah graduated high school with honors and got into Harvard Law School. When reporters asked her what inspired her to study law, she said simply, "I watched my father fight for justice twice, once in a ring, once in a courtroom. Both times, he won by telling the truth. I want to help other people do the same." And Netflix? They released a documentary called The Janitor Who Fought Back. 40 million people watched it worldwide. It wasn't just about a fight. It was about dignity, perseverance, and what happens when ordinary people find the courage to stand up against injustice. 5 years later, David Carter stood in his gym, watching a young kid, maybe 13 years old, skinny, nervous, walk through the door. "Excuse me, sir," the kid said quietly. I don't have much money, but I was hoping maybe I could train here." David smiled. He saw himself in that kid. The uncertainty, the hope, the need to be seen. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus." "Well, Marcus, let me tell you something." David put a hand on the kid's shoulder. "In this gym, we don't measure you by your bank account. We measure you by your heart. You show up, you work hard, you respect yourself and others. That's all the payment I need. You understand." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sir." "Good. Let's get you some gloves." As David watched Marcus begin his first lesson, he thought about everything he'd been through. The humiliation, the struggle, the fight, the trial, all of it. And he realized losing that janitor job was the best thing that ever happened to him. Because he didn't just get his pride back. He found his purpose. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Sometimes justice takes longer than we want, but arrives exactly when it should. And sometimes the man pushing a mop is actually a warrior waiting for his moment. David Carter's moment came, and when it did, he didn't just fight for himself. He fought for everyone who'd ever been invisible, overlooked, or told they didn't matter. And he won. Not just in the ring, not just in the courtroom, but in the way that matters most. He proved that truth, dignity, and courage will always defeat cruelty in the end. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure and still stand with dignity. That's real power. David Carter, founder of Phoenix Rising Martial Arts.